Hello, and welcome to everyone. This is going to be a lively discussion, and our panelists here have been waiting to actually be able to share. I think, as we all know, data are increasingly important to optimizing healthcare from the policy level, systems health level, to individualized level, where we can really aspire to personalized healthcare. And that's the good news. The challenge, of course, is that how do we actually manage the proliferation of all these health information? How do we organize it, analyze it, and how do we actually use it to actually provide health solutions? Well, the even better news, of course, is the parallel availability of digital health solution, which is what this panel is going to be all about. How do we actually leverage the potential of health information to be able to bring it into sustainable solutions to unlocking the power of the data? What we're going to talk about is how do the potential to empower people to better manage their own health, support the healthcare professionals, to better diagnose, to treat diseases more confidently, and also to assure that institutions and health systems are going to be able to um, work much more efficiently, certainly to be able to use the digital health information to actually improve the overall provision of health services and to actually be able to look for new solutions and beyond. What we're going to do today then is have an introduction that's going to provide you with a bit of an overview of digital health. And then we're going to have a very lively panel discussion. So thank you very much for tuning in to the second Link Live event in an educational series that's been brought to you by Roche as we uncover the tremendous value of digital health solutions in diagnostics, in treatment, and beyond. I'm your host. I am Durhan Wong-Leger. I am here in Canada, President and CEO of the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, where we have been moving forth in terms of implementing an orphan drug policy and a rare disease strategy. I also serve as chair of Rare Diseases International, which is our global platform for rare diseases. And certainly I am a ardent supporter of the importance of not only providing patients with data and being able to bring them into the healthcare solutions, but also the value of international collaboration, multi-stakeholder collaborations. So the focus of this event is to start a dialogue around the need to transform how health data can and should be managed to ensure that we unlock the full value of these medical insights and to demonstrate how digital health solutions from individual to systems level can help improve the delivery of care and certainly to improve the access for individuals. What I'm going to do is to just briefly introduce our panelists, and then we're going to begin the discussion. So I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce him or herself, and then we will start with a series of discussion. So I'm going to start with John Nosta, who is digital health expert and the founder of Nosta Lab in the US. John.
Good day, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Simply put, I am an innovation theorist. Background in medicine and marketing, I try to help people understand the diffusion of innovation into complex systems, particularly healthcare and medicine.
Thanks. Thank you very much, John. Also, would like to ask Fernando Garcia Alcalde, who's the head of data sciences for products at Roche in Basel, to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. Very happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel and this nice event. Sorry, apologies for the delay also from my side. So yeah, Fernando is my name. I work in Roche in the field of digital health, in particular digital products from the data science point of view. So looking forward to discussions today.
Thank you very much. And really pleased to have our medical expert, Dr. Carolyn Kay, OBGYN physician, global medical affairs lead, oncology assays, cervical cancer at Roche.
Thanks, Durhan, and hello, everybody. My name is Carolyn Kay, and I'm calling in from Seattle, Washington. I'm an OBGYN by background and now currently work at Roche as the global medical affairs lead, supporting the cervical cancer solutions team in the oncology assays business.
Thanks very much. So you see, we have a fairly diverse panel, but all experts in their specific areas. Before we start, just a few housekeeping rules. Hopefully, even though we've been a bit late, there will be an opportunity for you to provide questions to the panel and that we can get them to pick up on it on some of the Q&A. If you want to submit a question, you can do it through poll F, which you can find in a link in the link to live chat box. So if you've got a question, please submit it. We will collect them and be able to have an opportunity to present them to the panel at the end of the session. I know that we're running a bit late, but hopefully we'll be able to cover a few of these at the end of this session. So please do engage with us. Now I'm going to hand it over to our panelists, and we're going to start actually with a bit of an overview by Fernando, who's going to provide an introduction on the topic and to set the scene of what is the potential of data once unlocked. What are the challenges that the healthcare system is currently facing to use this new reality? And then we'll dive into a discussion with our panelists. So over to you, Fernando.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be expedite so we can catch up and leave enough room for, I think, the more interesting part, which is the discussion and the questions from the audience as well. So data health is a rather broad term. In a high level view, we can say that data health comprises the collection, storage, retrieval, the sharing, but also the use of data in a digital form, ultimately enabling the development and delivery of hopefully better, improved, more rapid healthcare services. Yeah. In the next slide, we see that these solutions can take different shapes, could be in telehealth, mobile health, driven by AI, self-monitoring devices, but also clinical and operational decision support solutions. Yeah. These solutions ultimately, previous slide, please. These solutions ultimately aim to facilitate the collection of the individual or population health information in different settings in order to securely and rapidly transform this information, process it, and offer it to patients, to healthcare professionals, or as well as interchanging it for even different medical disciplines. You may have heard in the global study of the WHO, there is a very nice description of what is the ideal case scenario for the transformation in the digital healthcare. In a nutshell, so it's said there that the digital solutions will be only valuable if they are accessible, if they enhance the efficiency and sustainability of the system, and also deliver a high quality and equitable care. The last part is especially important because this has to be done always respecting the necessary privacy and security constraints for patient health data. Yeah. So if this is done right, we have the opportunity to enhance care, as it was said before in the introduction, through medical diagnosis, database treatment decisions, digital therapeutics, and also ultimately creating a more evidence-based medicine skills and competencies for healthcare professionals. So in the next slide, yeah, we see here a small description of the landscape as we have today. So two main aspects to highlight. We see that the investment, we see here an example in the US, has grown dramatically in the last decade from 1.1 billion to 14 billion. And this investment is keeping this trend, right? So we can expect that this grows and this enhances the likelihood that the promise of going into more personalized healthcare can be achieved. In addition, we see that there is a lag also into the adoption, but that can happen. There is some reports, some studies that estimate that on average, in 6 years, we will see this emerging technologies starting to replace these more traditional delivery and business models. Yeah. One good side effect here is that as this healthcare innovation evolves, and they're more and more advanced in this setting, and also in the way the healthcare is delivered, the gap that there is for access on healthcare is lessening, and this is something that I think we should all be proud about and incentivize if possible. So, what would be the challenges that we are encountering here? In a nutshell, we have a lot of information already, and this is coming more and more every day. So it's estimated that every 73 days, the information that is available is doubled in the healthcare system. Ironically, today, it is also estimated that only about 15% of the organizations are really equipped to do this, to leverage this information and action it in order to make data-driven decisions. So why is this? in a nutshell, there are two main topics. One is the lack of this integrated infrastructure that allow to integrate and also to deploy this information in a actionable manner. But also there is the information silos. Yeah, that this interoperability is not available. Other barriers may include also this incompatibility between systems, data standards, terminologies, and also workflows, the lack of funding, and then for sure the concerns that there may be about security, privacy, and etc. Yeah. Another challenge that we are seeing is the evolving regulatory pathways, and policymakers are working on this in collaboration with industry and academic partners, and also the sometimes lack of the right technologies or infrastructure. That this is sometimes derived from the lack of a strong digital mindset. So all these things, in my opinion, they're being solved slowly, and that would be the topic of our discussion today. So I'm very much looking forward to the questions and the interaction with the panel. Thank you very much. And I think you're mute.
Sorry, I was trying to keep out the sound of the construction that's in the back of me here. I apologize. Thank you very much. So that was a very quick overview, but really, I think put us on the right path for the discussion. I'm just going to say as a quick aside, I wish this were here. My husband, who has 3 chronic conditions, cardiovascular disease, Parkinson's, and also motility disorders, and now, of course, cognitive decline. Every time we go to an appointment, we have to kind of carry the information from one healthcare system to the other, wondering kind of what the interactions are. And when we moved entirely from one town to the other, paid hundreds of dollars to get 600 some pages of his health records, kind of photocopied, of which are totally useless to us at this point. So I'm looking forward to this new age. And maybe there's nobody better than Carolyn who can help us in terms of at least beginning to address the question, how can we, how can digitalization, help us in terms of these recent innovations? And certainly from your perspective, how do you think we can use the data and the new approaches in terms of digital health to really get us to what is really primary in your area, and that is truly personalized healthcare?
Yeah, thanks, Doreen. And I think what you just said is very much what I feel when I wear my clinician hat. I think one of the undeniable contributions that digitalization has made in healthcare is this massive amount of data that can be collected, generated, analyzed, and then provided to all the stakeholders who have access to that data. And some of that data comes from wearable devices or data mined from the electronic health record, or patient education or clinical decision tools. And maybe some of these things are a lot more accessible now than they used to be. So I'm really excited to see how far we come and where we're headed. But the flip side, as many of you have alluded to, is that this data can be really overwhelming. And if the data is not distilled and presented in a way that's meaningful and fits the needs of the users, it doesn't make anyone's life better. So I think we're at this point where we really need to refine that digitalization and how we can improve the healthcare experience for everyone rather than creating a hindrance.
Thanks very much. That was a great overview. John, I'm going to turn it over to you as I won't say our digital nerd, but I think that is what you are. You're always at the leading edge of what's happening in terms of data and digital technology.
Thank you. I prefer geek to nerd. So, boy, there is so much to talk about here. And I think that Carolyn said something very interesting. She said distill. And I think that's an interesting word. The problem is, can you still distill the data? And for me, what I see in the world today is that the amount of clinical information, of digital information, of personal information is coming at the system so quickly, both in terms of volume and veracity, that the human brain, and dare I say the human medical system, does not have the ability to assimilate that. So it's data. Data has to be converted to knowledge. Knowledge has to be converted to wisdom. And that's such a tricky thing now, because I don't believe that today's clinician, rank and file clinician, has the cognitive capabilities to process that data. And that puts us in a very, very precarious situation. Do I want my physician to be unaware of clinical trials? Do I want my physician to be unaware of my genomic data, as abstract as that may be? So for me, the issue now is that kind of adoption sequence. And to cut to the chaser, I think there are two streams that are interesting. One is the digitalization, another word that we talked about. Digitalization is the magic, because digitizing a system allows us to dematerialize that system and to demonetize that system so that our EKG machine now fits in our pocket. And that is an example of, let's say, AliveCor, the company that has the simple EKG machine. So that digitization ultimately leads to democratization. So that's interesting. But I also think that there's a psychopathology here. And I don't want to get too deep in this, but I think it's very interesting because I'll ask a simple question. As the non-clinician in the room, I'm allowed to ask this question. Who's the smartest person in the exam room? Back a few years ago, that was an easy answer because it was the clinician, it was the physician. The physician had a sense of authority. That authority was determined by the prayer shawl that she would wear around her neck. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Not the prayer shawl that she would wear around her neck, the stethoscope, that badge of authority that would identify that I am the smartest person in the room. Today, we're seeing a fundamental shift there where technology, in essence, AI and the computer is now the smartest person in the room. I'm going to stop there because I think that's enough stirring of the pot. But that's kind of where we are in terms of technology. It's the diffusion of innovation into the system, but it's also the adoption sequence. And I'll end with one phrase because we hear it all the time. Most clinicians will say they do something because, quote unquote, that's the way I was trained. And that is probably one of the most striking imperatives to drive care and clinical digital transformation. If they weren't trained that way, it's very difficult to move on.
Well, you've already presaged maybe what the next important question is, and that is you tantalize us with the possibilities are. Carolyn's really made it clear that this is where we ought to be. What are the challenges? What are the barriers? How are we going to implement digital solutions in our healthcare systems? And I may ask you to take a broad approach. I mean, there's certainly the US system, and we've got a whole host of environments there. We've got more global systems. And I think in Canada, where we have public health, which is really strongly democratized, but it means that you don't really necessarily have leading edge, environments that are going to pick it up early, and then hopefully it filters down. And then, of course, we've got a global challenge, right? How are we going to implement these digital solutions in order for them to be able to provide that kind of support to healthcare that we're talking about? What are challenges to implementation? And maybe I'll start with you, John, and I'll move to Carol.
Well, the first premise is the myth of diversity. We have inculcated into our innovation system this idea that solutions must have an equitable component to them. That's not the nature of innovation. The nature of innovation is that it is unequally distributed early on, and then it is distributed more broadly. I think we have to be very, very careful here, because when you look at things like, let's use the flat screen TV, the $10,000 38-inch TV screen, or the first cell phone, that first phone that Gordon Gekko used walking on the beach that was $10,000 US. These were inaccessible points of innovation. However, the innovation was distributed accordingly. And you know what? It was the rich and entitled people who were the guinea pigs. I'll say that again. The rich and entitled people were the guinea pigs that allowed innovation to take a foothold. So for me, that's the first thing. The second thing is going back to this word data. We talk about all this data, all this data, all this data. Well, ultimately, that's what we need. We need clinical validation, because to push people along in a continuum, for me to use a new imaging technology to visualize a nodule in the lung, I need to have clinical validation. And many times, digital innovators, in the context of digital health and the consumer perspective, have this philosophy of build it and they will come. Sadly, the continuum is really a combination of consumer engagement with clinical and clinician validation. So I think we have to go back to the data and say, here's a p-value. P stands for patient, but also P stands for statistical significance. So those are two things that are very, very important from my perspective.
That's a great comment. And I think one of the things you said right off the top, right, we need to be inequitable in order to get the equity. And it may take that kind of stepwise approach.
It's a tricky thing. It's not a comfortable statement. Evolution and advancement, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's uneven. And I see that sometimes we put constraints upon the innovation process at very early stages that encumber success.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Carolyn, I'm going to ask you actually to put your clinician hat back on, step back into your role there. What would you see as some of the practical solutions, if there are such, in order to implement digital solutions into a healthcare system? Maybe picking up what John said, or maybe even kind of coming up with maybe a slightly different perspective on that.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes straight to top of mind is that not too many years ago, I was working in a health system that was just starting to implement an electronic health record. And I have to tell you that it was a very long process. The whole hospital had to be trained on it, from the clinicians to the labs, to the folks who did scheduling and billing, everyone. And, we had to decide on who was going to enter in the information, where it was going to go, how the data would get entered, all of those little things that need to be secured and tucked away before something can be functional. And it took months before we were somewhat functional, and then many years before we fully felt like there was a flow and there was an ease to using that health record. So I think that's one of the biggest health challenges, is just getting all the stakeholders, all the users aligned, and that there is a streamlined flow of how that information goes through that system. And then also crosstalk. So not just the records in this one particular hospital that I was at, but we also need, to be able to access the records of patients from other hospitals and other systems in order to form a more fully holistic view of a patient's record. So I think that's still being worked on. It's getting better, but it always could be even more better.
No, I can totally identify with what you're saying. And certainly it's it's an uneven process, but it really also requires a great deal of many different kinds of support systems being put in place. So it's interesting, as you say, even getting the acceptance there, I think is great. So Fernanda, I'm going to go to you, and you're going to take us more globally if you can. I mean, as the non-American or the non-North American even on the panel, can you give us a perspective in terms of how you see some of these digital health solutions? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities for bringing them in more globally, and maybe even in terms of low middle income countries where they could do tremendous good, but may face some different kinds of challenges?
I'm happy to do so. I mean, many countries are facing significant challenges when it comes to technology ownership and privacy and data security. This is not only in low-income countries; it's in general. And one other topic that comes with this is the differences in the countries also prevents very much what John was saying, the availability to do the digital innovation at scale, since when you do need the clinical validation, of course, and the accessibility of data will be very much variable and depending on the country. So having like policymakers, industry, healthcare system together working on this will be a big boost. As John was saying, we have a kind of a paradox, because the innovation, especially in the digital space, grows with niche and then scales. However, in our setting, we need to have this at scale validation to make sure that the scientific rigor, the medical value is there, is safe, and the privacy is preserved, right? So this has to be understood. So balance this in a way that enables this distribution of solutions will really help. So that's something that has to be closing these gaps soon.
Yeah, so there's significant, certainly, challenges from the both infrastructure point of view, but also the policies and certainly the kind of regulations and understanding of those as well. So huge challenges. I'm going to combine two questions, given that we started late. I mean, two things I know we really wanted to have all of you address maybe, and maybe I'm going to start with Fernando, picking up on where you came from. What do you, what have you seen in terms of some of the solutions to be able to better implement digital solutions to better manage data? But also, is there any personal experience you've had in terms of helping to implement these, or you've been able to witness in other environments that you can bring to mind? How can you've raised the challenges? How can we do a better job in terms of managing data to implement these digital solutions?
Yeah. So, I mean, in my opinion, having this integrated and interoperable digital healthcare infrastructure is key, right? And in this manner, we can then tailor the care appropriately. The one of the burdens, as I was saying before, is how we can make this at scale in different geographies, different healthcare systems. There are solutions such as federated data management that enable to share data with different parties, different hospitals, as was said before, but also with different geographies in a way that preserves this privacy and IP, potential IP that there is in the data. So that can be a way. Definitely we need to create and orchestrate these security ecosystems. And I think that the more we can work together as an area of not individual companies, but together with, again, policymakers, hospitals, healthcare providers. So we will be able to increase this trust, in the population, but also in the policymakers at the end, so we can achieve this all together.
Great, thank you very much. And again, as you say, I like the notion of talking about an ecosystem approach, right? Because it's all the parts of it. So, John, I'm going to turn to you, and I know that I labeled you as an American, but I know you do a lot of work globally. You do a lot of consulting as well globally, and understand very well the global environment. Give us some of your thoughts in terms of how do we implement this, and have you seen any in your personal experiences, or have you seen any examples you say, yes, this is how we can actually speed up this?
It's interesting because we, as Fernando so eloquently said, that we are in a world of paradoxes, that we want scale, but we want innovation. And it's really a problem. And I think there's an interesting paradox here with respect to developing countries. And there's two points to talk about. The first is that the solution to many of these issues is technology, and the opportunity lies best in sub-Saharan Africa, in developing countries, where the implementation of a simple telemedicine protocol or a simple prenatal screening program could be extraordinarily powerful. So when I look to developing countries, that's where the opportunity actually lives. Now, here's the other thing. It goes back to the I word. Is it innovation or is it implementation? I would argue that many technological solutions for healthcare, monitoring for atrial fibrillation in stroke, or prenatal monitoring, or simple weight tracking in congestive heart failure, those technological modalities are available now. So really, an innovative program is a program that is well implemented. So when I look at the countries, let's say like Mexico, where there's a tremendous problem regarding metabolic syndrome and obesity, the opportunity to implement programs supersedes the prerequisite for being the innovator. Picasso said, good artists borrow and great artists steal. I think that's the lesson here with digital health, that there are opportunities for us to implement solutions that already exist. So that's kind of where I think is an important observation here.
Hey, I would not have expected you to go there, because I know you're always dancing on the cutting edge of the innovation, but I think you're absolutely right. There's so much more that we've got that we have not even taken advantage of in many areas. And certainly, it could be a tremendous benefit, as you say, also in emerging healthcare systems where cost constraints are huge. So, Caroline, I'm going to pivot back to you, and maybe you can drive us back. I love where you always come from me, where maybe I'm pushing to, maybe you don't want to come from there. It's taking us back to the clinical level, taking us back into the actual hospital system there. You talked about some of the challenges before. What do you see as, solutions? And if we go back to in many of our very well developed healthcare systems, including mine here in Canada, right? The implementation of digital tools, as John talked about, far, far below kind of what the potential is and certainly what the benefit is. How do we actually speed up the implementation here?
Oh, geez, that's a tough one. Implementation. I'm not so sure I can speak so much about, that part. But I can tell you, maybe share with you, my experience with something that I feel like has been a fairly decent success. And that's a digital solution that I frequently use, as do many OBGYNs. And it's an app that helps with clinical decision making, because guidelines of how cervical screening is supposed to be managed has changed many times over the last few years. It can be very confusing. And so a group of stakeholders got together and created an app that used guidelines that are informed by large data sets and studies in the United States. And basically you put in a patient's characteristics, their history in an app, and the app will put out a management guidance for you. What steps should the clinician take based on these patient characteristics and results? And that's primarily what most clinicians are using, rather than going through all these papers and these algorithms. This is a really nice streamlined way. And this is what I mean by, we have so much data that has been generated. And if you go to the web version of this app, you can see all the data tables, and my eyes always glaze over when I see that. But this app it doesn't have all that. You just need to put in the patient's information, and then it'll give you a management result, which is really great.
Yeah.
John,
Can I ask? Oh, sorry, John, go ahead. I was going to ask Carolyn whether this app is available to patients. Can patients actually get access to the app?
Yeah, so this is a great question. This app right now is geared towards clinicians. However, there are versions of it that are geared towards patients. So it's more in a patient-friendly language. They take out some of the data analysis and numbers and figures and things like that. And there's a lot more explanation about what those definitions and results mean. So yes, absolutely.
Great. John, you wanted to jump in there. Go ahead.
I think that there is a profound lack of alignment with innovation and political needs. I think that these black t-shirt wearing kids from California who come up with an idea do not align it with the clinical need. It took 67 years for the airline industry to reach 50 million customers. It took 3 years for Facebook to reach 50 million customers. It took 19 days for Pokemon Go to reach 50 million customers. And it took GPT 0 days. It was almost a purely vertical ascent. So here's my observation. Maybe the ideas suck. If we struggle, look, everybody knows about arterial blood gases. Remember the old days, you have to stick a needle in the radial artery to get arterial blood gases. Now we have pulse oximetry, right? Did people struggle to adapt and adopt pulse oximetry into care? Was it a difficult thing? No, it was easy. It was easy. So I wonder if we need better alignment at early stages with ideas that fit into the clinical workflow, that fit into the clinical dynamic. Because I find that these cool hipsters that we call innovators in the digital health space, oftentimes, not as a rule, but oftentimes fail to the fundamental clinical utility, the workflow dynamic, and all those things. So from an adoption perspective, it's not just pushing through the idea into the system, it's making sure that the idea aligns. And that's difficult, but I think that's where you have to start.
And you have to start, with kind of what is it that the patient needs? What is it that the clinician needs, right? As you say,
Sure.
I mean, we're doing more of that. I mean, I go back to my dad used to always say, I can sell you anything as long as I know what you need, And I think that's kind of where we're at. John, Fernando, let me jump over to you, because you've heard it, and a bit in terms of the end, in terms of getting implementation, and John's very provocative approach of maybe what we've got is a bunch of tools that really are not necessarily aligned to what people need. Again, maybe taking a more global perspective, how do we get aligned in with some of these digital solutions to things that not only people can need, but they can bring into the system where they are now? I know you alluded to this a bit before.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the main challenges, right? To ensure at the end adoption, you can have the best idea of the world, but if it's not used, then you're out of luck, right? So to ensure this adoption, you do need to do like smart product development and product planning, in the sense that it fits with the patient pathway or the healthcare pathway that you're addressing, right? So if you can nail that, you are in a very good path. But in my opinion, it doesn't conclude there. You also need to have the evidence, necessary evidence, to ensure that clinicians will use it. Because as John was alluding at the beginning, like for very good reasons, they will not trust it from the beginning. So they will very much like to see, so why should I use it? Why is it better? Can you prove it to me in a way that is convincing? So these two pieces are key. So it has to be both accessible and in the right channel, in the right moment also, because if you have the solution that needs a lot of external input and it's too late to make the decision, you're also out of luck. But the evidence generation is key. So I think these two aspects have to be hand to hand. And therefore, yes, digital solutions have this potential to be viral very quickly. However, in the healthcare setting, this is slowed down by this fact that you need to have also this evidence. So I could not imagine that we will have like a healthcare solution soon that would go to millions of users in no time. It would need to have first some steps to be able to fulfill them.
So a bit of what John's saying before, it's an incremental approach that we need to take. But basically what you're also saying is that, and I think Carolyn kind of gave a great illustration with it with the app, if we can demonstrate the value of it, we can demonstrate the efficiency of it, but also demonstrate how it actually saves the healthcare system tremendous time in diagnosis, tremendous time in getting to the right prescriptions, but also then the system. I'm going to pivot a little bit because we have a number of questions here. And John, the first one's for you. And I don't levitate out of your seat, because I know this will work for you a lot. The question that seemed to be the most voted for in the chat line was, what will be the role of AI chat GPT in personalized healthcare and future individual patient support?
GPT is, let me take a step back. The idea is easy. The answer is easy as long as you think of it. And that's a fundamental truth, right? If I didn't think of it, well, it's not part of the plan. And in medicine, a differential diagnosis is the hallmark of a path forward. And as long as my differential diagnosis includes those elements, that's a powerful tool. So for me, GPT is a cognitive palette for human curation. I'll say that again, a cognitive palette for human curation. We now are entering the domain where our cognitive capabilities will be supported by GPT and AI. So that's the role. The role is that it's a cognitive bicycle. The fastest animal in the world used to be the cheetah. But then someone invented a bicycle and created something called a mechanical advantage. What we're seeing now at this time is actually the fifth industrial revolution, where we are entering this idea of a cognitive era. So we have cognitive augmentation that will fundamentally change the game. It's a complex discussion, but I think it is singularly the biggest event in the history of humanity. And dare I say, it very well may become the defining event in the context of digital health.
I am so excited by what you just said. We've got a meeting set up for my husband for our geriatrics consultant, and we're looking at what the next stage in terms of, what he should be getting. He's actually experiencing considerable cognitive decline, but the idea that we can actually have really smart solutions for him, maybe engaging a little bit of the AI, is absolutely amazing, because what we get mostly now is we don't really know. We can take a guess. So maybe we just need better guessing based on kind of what a really smart device could tell us. And not no disrespect to the clinicians that are working with us. That's exciting. I need to give you a chat later on myself. Second
But you know
question
what?
here.
Let me jump in there. Is it really critical for the clinician to know what 1,6-fructose diphosphate is? Do you need to memorize? And I'm getting smiles, which is a good thing. Do you really need to memorize the Krebs cycle? I think the cognitive burden is shifting. And as that cognitive burden shifts to technology, it allows something very interesting to happen. It allows clinicians to have relationships with their patients. Well,
Yeah.
lordy, that is something that people have been asking for as long as I can remember.
It's a lovely thought that we can really be focusing on kind of what is important between the relationship. That's that old show that used to be, "Are you smarter than a fifth grader?" The answer was not that adults are not smarter than fifth graders, that we're teaching our fifth graders nonsense that no adult ever needs when they grow up, right? So why are we still doing this? So never mind. This is a sideline that we probably should not get into.
You hit the nail on the head, because the future illiterate of this century will not be those who can't read or write. It will be those who cannot unlearn and relearn. Unlearn and relearn. Now, that was from Future Shock. That's not my quote, but that's what we need to do. We need to unlearn and relearn, patients and clinicians.
Okay, they're going to throw us off with this webinar in a second, John. So we're going to move back into a stream of questions. Actually, this is a really important question. I think it was directed to Fernando to begin with, and that is, what are the most critical measures and best practices for effectively managing data security in health analytics? I think you raised the issues of privacy and confidentiality of sensitive patient information, because that's the flip side of it, right? We've got all this data, it's accessible to everybody, but what do we need to do to ensure that we're going to be able to keep it private, and we're going to be able to keep it, within the bounds of what the patient wants?
Very good. Happy to take the question. Very pertinent. I would like to comment also in the previous question that this is I agree with all this. Still, the evidence, the interpretability, the reference that comes from ChatGPT has to, or large language models in general has to grow. So we are also like looking forward that this is in this level of quality and rigor. The same goes for data privacy. So when we have a responsibility, yeah. So patients donate the data or allow us to do something with the data. So we have to have very clear and transparent what data we're collecting, for what, and to live up to these contracts, we call them. Luckily, more and more there are policies in different geographies that really have setting the scenes very clearly, and this is what we need to step up for. I'm talking from the industry point of view. I'm a data scientist. I do have a team of data scientists. We're very excited about playing with data and so on. But before anything we do, we make sure that all these legal requirements are fulfilled. And the general policy that we take is like go in excess, not try to find ways to not do so. So this is the key. For that, it's very important to loop with experts. So we have privacy officers that help us, but also there are lawyers, the direct connection with, as I said before, with the policymakers. So all this very, very well streamlined, and be very comfortable that this, yes, slows down the process, but this is actually an enabler, because without that, we may encounter that this is not actually being able to scale, because this trust that we need to build all together, it will never be there. So it's a key component for our business.
Those guardrails are so essential. And all we need to do is violate them, right? All we need to do is have situations which actually are going to expose data to actually throw everything off. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to be so cognizant going forward that we're building the safeguards into the system. I know we're a bit over time, but I've got a final question here, and I'm hoping I can pose it to Carolyn. The question is, why the development focus seems to be on optimizing collection and storage of data instead of solving how the data should be used to actually change the routines of care? And I don't know the question so much why, but what would you suggest? And based on what John has already said as well, is that the real goal, right, is how do we get this data to actually be able to change how care is actually provided, and back away from a bit of what do we need to do to collect more to store it better?
I don't see this as, mutually exclusive things. I think these are all things that we need to be doing. If we're not collecting data in a way that's, for example, from populations that actually have the disease, then we're missing out on a very key piece of information there. And if we're not, so I think just even if we don't collect it, then it doesn't inform our algorithms, it doesn't inform our guidelines correctly. So I think it's all of these things, not it's, data collection, generation, and then how that data is applied. I think it's all of those things that we need to be thinking about.
No, that's a great question, answer, and certainly goes back to what Fernando presented at the beginning, right? We collect it, we have to be able to absolutely be able to store it, and then we need to transform it into usable tools and solutions. And maybe what John said at the beginning, as well. We need to start with the question of how do we want it to be used? What problem are we trying to solve? But without the data, without large amounts of the data, which is kind of where we are now, we're not able to get take advantage of all the information that could be available. I mean, even Chat GBT, right, relies on the fact that we collect a huge amount of information in order to inform the algorithms, to inform the AI. I'm going to close it here. Unfortunately, I wish that we had had the full hour because obviously we could have had even more, exciting discussion. I'm going to just give each one of you absolutely 30 to 45 seconds to think about what do you see as the future here? What is the future of data, digitalization of health, data health? And I'm going to start with John because John, I know you always got something top that you can pop right off, and I'll give everybody else a little chance to think about it.
Isn't it interesting that when we look at technology, particularly GPT-3 and even AI in the clinical context, we focus on the occasional error? In fact, with GPT, we also focus on things like hallucinations, right? People have said that that's an inappropriate word. But that is completely analogous to the imperfection of humanity. And that we look at the emerging computer systems today and we compare them to perfection. I think we have to benchmark the clinical capabilities of our clinicians and show how new technology stands up to their imperfections, because the system is imperfect. And I think that would shine a light on key areas of improvement. Let's just pick, for example, psychiatry and mental health. The subjectivity of that clinical domain is extraordinarily high. And I think technology can shine a light on the intrinsic errors of subjectivity and make things much more specific and accurate.
I love that. So even our systems and our intelligence systems
Absolutely.
can learn and unlearn, but they have to learn from mistakes if we're just shooting for straight perfection. Fernando.
Thank you. So in my view, what I'm more excited about in this transformation that we're having is the possibility to arrive to a shift on paradigm from volume-based healthcare to more value-based healthcare, when we can focus into reimbursement models, delivery systems that are focused more into how much better the patient is at the end, more than into how much of the resources have been used. So this is digital healthcare would enable this dramatically, and this is a field that I think we can all again be proud that if this shift comes for the work that we all together doing this in this field is happening. So that's my 2 cents there.
Love the notion. I mean, again, it is value-based. And I think if we focus on the value that's being delivered, right, it transforms from being a cost to that investment in value. So great. And Carolyn, last to you, and you can wear whatever hat you want in answering this in terms of the future.
Well, I'll still wear my clinician hat, but I think that it's really important that we emphasize like the personalized care that digital health can offer. And what I think goes hand in hand with personalized care is equitable care. I think that's where digital health has a lot of opportunity to do great things and address some of the gaps in healthcare that have led to inequalities in healthcare. Because ultimately, we want to live in a world where everyone has access to equitable healthcare, the opportunity to attain their best health, and digital health will be maybe one way of reaching that goal.
That's so perfect. It brings us back to where we started from, right? How do we harness the power of digital solutions to actually deliver the very best possible health to each and every individual? And you really do see that as where the ultimate future of this lies. So really appreciate that as a great closing comment. Thank you, everyone. This was an amazing discussion. I learned a great deal, and I really found that you each brought such a valuable perspective to this topic. So again, thank you very much, John, Fernando, Carolyn, and really thanks to our host for making this happen. We know we have to scramble to another platform, but we hung in there, and I think we've definitely provided some great dialogue for everybody. So thank you again very, very much, and look forward to our next Link Live event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice day, everybody.